For over 17 years, Halo 3 has harboured the most elusive of mysteries. One that has confused and befuddled several generations of Halo fans. Hidden within the ruins of Sandtrap lies an ancient secret, left behind by our in-universe and real-world forefathers, the Glyphs. For 14 years, these glyphs were contained to Halo 3, appearing solely in a handful of multiplayer maps and nowhere else, until Halo Infinite, where not only did they resurface for the first time in 14 years, but they did so in the campaign, and with clear intentionality behind their placement. Their surprise resurfacing injected new life into the investigations behind their meaning, and it's led to some pretty big revelations. And today, it's finally time to dive into the mystery of the Sandtrap Glyphs ourselves. But before we even look at the glyphs themselves specifically, I first want to briefly go over where these things have been found, because the few locations that they appear is really relevant to their meaning. So all 5 of their locations in Halo 3 are on the Ark: Guardian, Construct, one of the facilities in its cartographer, Epitaph and Citadel, which are different floors in the same tower that acts as the headstone above the burial site of Mihelic and Bias, and of course, Sandtrap, an ancient site buried by the Ark sands that was occupied and partially excavated by brutes during the war. And then, in Halo Infinite, they first show up holographically in the walls of the Foundation Silex storage facility, then in the central room of the conservatory, which is the hub for an installation's monitor, and then also on these tablets that are held by foreigner statues in both the repository, which is a glorified data storage facility, and the Silent Auditorium, a facility which, among many other things, served as a courtroom, a prison, and a place of execution. Now, across both Halo 3 and Halo Infinite, there's one common denominator between almost all of the locations that the glyphs appear. They're all some sort of burial site, the only exceptions being Construct and Guardian, the latter of which we're going to come back to later. Sandtrap is an ancient site that was buried by the sands of the Ark. The Epitaph and Citadel Tower is above the burial site of Mihelic and Bias. The Foundation facility was where thousands of Silexes were buried. The conservatory, of which, by the way, like Sandtrap, was also excavated by the brutes, was, according to the encyclopedia that was released right after Infinite came out, where Zeta Halo's monitor essentially buried herself, overcome with the shame of taking part in the Endless's burial. The repository is a burial site of data, and the Silent Auditorium is where the Foreigners buried all traces of the Endless. It's very obvious that there's a connection between where these glyphs show up in both Halo 3 and Halo Infinite, and furthermore, it is also clear that both Bungie and Halo Studios /343 are on the same page regarding this connection. In both eras of Halo, they show up in some kind of burial site. But we're going to come back to this point later on, because there are quite a few interpretations of the meaning behind this connection that require some extra context to truly understand, and that context is what we're going to look at first. So let's talk about the actual glyphs themselves. What are they? Who made them? Where did they come from? All very important things that need addressing. Believed to be foreigner in origin, these glyphs were created by Justin Hayward, who was not foreigner or any kind of ancient being in the Halo universe, but rather was one of Halo 3's environment artists at Bungie, who worked on Sandtrap and actually designed these glyphs. In an interview in 2010 on Bungie.net, when pressed on these glyphs and also the community's nascent investigations into them, Justin said the following: "I wanted those to have meaning. My hope was that people would pore over the script and try to figure it out. It's actually the same text that appears on Epitaph." And then, when asked about there being some deep secret hidden within the glyphs, and also the community's attempts to discover said secret, he simply said, "Maybe we should let that ride." Now, this is important because there will be some people out there who are going to try and argue that there was never any intended meaning behind these glyphs. They were simply just meant to be some cool set dressing for the foreigner environment. But here you have the dude who literally created them, directly addressing the attempts to translate them and confirming on his own developer's website, mind you, that they can be translated and that they do have meaning. Now, something very interesting that I noticed when going through this old Bungie article that I haven't seen a single person talk about in 17 years of diving into this mystery pertains to this picture right here of one of the very early original iterations of Sandtrap, when far more of the buried ruins were visible and part of the play space. Is it just me, right? Or do these original structures, the structures that we can presume, by the way, still exist beneath the sands of Sandtrap? Is it me, or do they kind of look like some of the glyphs? I really can't shake the similarities. I've racked my head to try and find some kind of meaning in this coincidence and to try and figure out what it actually means for the glyphs and their possible translation, and honestly I can't really come up with anything meaningful. Maybe these shapes were just the genesis of the glyphs themselves, giving Justin some inspiration for their shape and design. Or maybe it has a far deeper meaning that is currently eluding me. I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I can't think of anything meaningful. Leave them down below in the comments. Now, I don't know about you guys, but all these mysteries are really starting to work up a hunger in me. But thankfully, today's sponsor, HelloFresh, are here to help. Make 2025 the year that you finally achieve that Spartan physique, and let HelloFresh help you toward that iconic goal. With over 50 dinner options and even more market items available that suit any healthy lifestyle, including more than 30 calorie-smart and protein-smart recipes each week, HelloFresh is the perfect non-AI assistant to help you strip fat, build protein, and stay healthy. Always packed with fresh ingredients, everything arrives pre-portioned right at your doorstep for less hassle and more enjoyment. And if, like me, you're a sucker for skipping breakfast most days, then, well, HelloFresh has you covered there as well. They're now giving all subscribers free breakfast for life. One free breakfast item per box via an active sub, so you can truly start your days right. So, if, like me, you're pursuing the Spartan physique this year, then support the channel by clicking my link or scan the QR code on screen and subscribe to HelloFresh today. Every purchase helps to support me and my content, and also helps to support your gains, or losses. Thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring, and let's solve this damn mystery. So, the glyphs themselves seem to come in 3 different forms. There's the actual glyphs, then there are some skewed or damaged or contorted English letters and Arabic numerals in a digital format, and then there are what appear to be lines of corruption or line breaks that act as spaces. Throughout Halo, there have been a number of foreign languages and alphabets that the community have done a really good job at scouring through and deciphering. The glyphs here, however, are not a part of any deciphered foreign alphabet or language, or really any other alphabet that's appeared at all in the franchise besides in this glyph format. And when the glyphs are isolated, any attempt to run them through a cipher solver or to just decipher them manually hasn't really resulted in anything that's worth talking about. The digital looking letters and numbers are another weird one as well, because some of them show up looking perfectly normal, whereas others show up upside down or inverted or flipped, and a few of them even appear to be corrupted or broken. Now, I'm not going to waste your time here. A ton of methods have been employed to try and make some sort of sense out of these letters and numbers and glyphs, but to no avail. No clear translation has yet been discovered. People have tried inverting them, overlaying repeating lines of glyphs, taking the numbers and letters and overlaying them with glyphs that kinda correspond with their shape. I mean, hell, fellow YouTuber Red Nomster even tried running the isolated glyphs through the same software that was used to crack one of the Zodiac Killer's ciphers. Yes, the Zodiac Killer. And despite this software outputting, granted, the most logical translations yet, it still doesn't seem to have yielded any decent results. I mean, there isn't even an agreed upon consensus as to how many unique glyphs there even are in this passage, and so I think it's gonna be a while before we get any kind of logical, sensible translation of it roundabout. That said, I actually don't think that a lack of direct translation of the glyphs is really that much of a roadblock when it comes to understanding the meaning behind them. In fact, I actually think that we have more than enough evidence at hand right now, courtesy of both Bungie and View43, to solve the meaning of the glyphs without knowing their precise translation. Now, I do just want to issue a quick note here. Like with many things, I think it's safe to assume that the precise translation of the glyphs that View43 have internally decided upon isn't the same as what Justin Hayward originally ideated on back in 2007. There's a chance that it is, but that's one of those things that I can imagine got lost in translation. That said though, I don't think that this is another case of the human-foreigner connection being retconned by mistranslation, but rather, I think that although the actual precise meaning of the glyphs in Halo Infinite may be different to Halo 3, I do think that their broader meaning remains the exact same as what Bungie intended. Obviously, the Endless didn't exist in 2007, and so Justin Hayward obviously didn't create the glyph cipher in reference to them, but it's quite clear that their presence in Halo Infinite is tied to the Endless, specifically to their burial. And that feeds very nicely into talking about the various potential meanings of these glyphs, starting out with my theory that these glyphs represent some kind of eulogy that's recited upon the passing or burial of something that the Foreigners hold great respect for. In Halo Infinite, every single glyph appearance has some direct tie to the Endless, and a lot of the time, where the glyphs actually are and how they're integrated into the world almost feels like they're honouring something. They aren't just written on some random wall or accent, they're baked into a gilded pyramid at the centre of the conservatory, or they're on the tablets that are being presented by Foreigners of whom were deemed so important they were immortalised in the form of giant gilded statues. This implies that the glyphs are a sign of respect the Foreigners pay to those that they bury, friend or foe, and that they're present here because the Endless were capable of the one thing that their mortal enemy were not: surviving the Halos. And so, to honour such a dangerous yet incredible species, they adorned the various sites involved in their burial with this eulogy, as a sign of respect for their immense power. This fits in with their locations in Halo 3 as well. Granted, we don't know the purpose of Citadel, but their heavy presence in Epitaph, the cathedral at the top of the tower that echoes with Foreigner hymns, is them paying respect to Mendicant Bias, once their greatest creation turned greatest enemy. But the way that Sandtrap ties into this theory goes far deeper. So we still have no idea what the ruins were originally built for. I mean, hell, they're mostly still buried under the sands. But while I was surfing the net to look for potential leads on what their purpose could be, I found a Bungie.net post from 2009 about the glyphs that contained a very interesting detail. So, apparently, before Halo 3 released, when Bungie were having members of the press into the studio to play bits of the game and then write articles about it, when they played Sandtrap, Bungie specifically told the journalists in their articles to, quote, say some things but not others. So, for example, to say that the map had sand, but don't say that it has elephants, just as an example. Now, I've looked everywhere on the internet, and I can't find this article, but apparently, as an extension to this clause, Bungie specifically asked IGN to mention Relic when talking about Sandtrap. Now, not only are Relic and Sandtrap the only two times in the entire franchise that the Albatross has appeared, at least in a game, but per Relic's description, the structure at the centre of the map was meant to be a structure built by the Foreigners as a memorial to those who fell in battle against the Flood. So, if you interpret Bungie doing this as them very subtly implying that Sandtrap's ruins were once another one of these monuments that were built as a monument or a cenotaph to those valiant warriors who perished fighting the Parasite, then that too makes Sandtrap a burial site of some kind, and further reinforces the notion that these glyphs are a form of eulogy. I mean, hell, if you want to go a step further, there's even a room on Sandtrap that feels awfully like a crypt to me. It has a big gilded entrance, followed by a pillar adorned with the glyphs placed right before the entrance to the burial room, in which the walls are covered in murals of what appear to be a guardian or maybe a faceless foreign warrior, flanking the crypt itself, which is also adorned with a hologram bearing the very same symbol. And then, speaking more ambiguously, I just think it's kind of obvious from the presentation and I know this is quite ambiguous, but the kind of vibe of Sandtrap that it's meant to be some kind of ancient burial site. Vast ruins engulfed by the sands of time just screams burial site to me. I mean, the map itself kind of even looks like a barrow that we'd see on Earth. Again, the only maps that, at least as far as I can tell, definitely aren't burial sites where the glyphs are present are Construct and Guardian, but don't worry, the latter has far more relevance in the next theory. So for this next theory, I want to give full credit to Red Nomster because he was the one who not only came up with this theory, but also really spearheaded the renewed investigation into the glyphs when they reappeared in Halo Infinite. His videos on this topic were fantastic, and links to all three can be found in the description. So, his interpretation of the glyphs is that they represent either the original form or a translated form of the Mantle of Responsibility, as it was decreed by the precursors themselves, and that their presence in both Halo 3 and Halo Infinite is almost like the Foreigner's own version of the Ten Commandments. For the same reason you can make the argument that the locations that the glyphs are found mean they could be representing some kind of eulogy, you can also argue that they resemble the Mantle as well. In the Foreigner's eyes, every act associated with them, so fighting and dying to stop the Flood, defeating Mihelic and Bias, burying the Endless, etc., all those things were done to uphold the Mantle of Responsibility and, in their eyes, protect all life in the galaxy from some kind of significant threat. To add to the theory, he also breaks down the secret ancient voices who speak if you hang around too long near the glyphs in the conservatory.
It must be done. We have no choice.
Is there an agreement?
There is.
If they cannot be purged, they must be contained. Balance restored.
No being will ever learn the truth of what we have done today. This is our darkest moment. Our eternal shame. Buried with these rings. Forever hidden.
Now, these voices are currently believed to be speaking after Halo Infinite's legendary ending, and belong to the Criterion, of whom are responsible for burying the Endless. There are three individual ancient voices here, supposedly belonging to the Grand Edict from the legendary ending, the Isodidact, and Chant to Green, who was the one who took over the role of Life Shaper after the Librarian died. And very coincidentally, or not, those giant Foreigner statues holding the tablets that contain the glyphs just so happen to come in three different variations, one of which has a pattern on its face that is very, very clearly based on some of Bungie's very early and quite possibly oldest concept art for the Guardians in Halo 3. Now, we can safely assume that of all the three members of the Criterion, this Guardian-faced one is the Isodidact because not only was he a warrior servant who served against the Flood, but he was also the one who fired the Halos, thus making him a Guardian of the Galaxy. But it's the meaning behind the Guardians that really matters here. So the Guardians were created quite literally to enforce the Mantle. And, you know, how fitting is it that there just so happens to be a partial Guardian symbol embedded into the glyph tablet in the conservatory right above it, almost appearing as the title of the glyph passage. Interestingly though, this isn't just a Guardian symbol. In fact, it's a combination of both the Guardian and the Shield World symbols. And Shield Worlds, of course, were used to shelter life from the galaxy-ending Halos, which, even in the most dire of times, still upholds the Mantle's decree to protect and cultivate life. And on that note, there's actually one small glyph cameo that I haven't mentioned yet that's actually quite relevant here and it fits quite nicely. So for some reason, only in Halo 2 Anniversary's cutscenes, they show up in the hologram on Delta Halo that's referencing the other installations. But this is also referencing the Ark, which of course also played a role in the conservation measure for the same reason as the Shield Worlds. It acted as a safe haven from the Halos for the Librarian's index species. So I think it's very clear that the glyphs do have some kind of relation to the Mantle of Responsibility. I mean, that very unique and literally never before seen combined Guardian Shield World symbol, that really confirms it to me. But earlier on, I mentioned the idea that these glyphs kind of act as the Foreigner's very own 10 Commandments, and that wasn't just hearsay or some ambiguous generalization. No. In fact, one of the few almost sensical things that Red Nomster managed to decipher from the glyphs is, if you flip them horizontally and vertically, you'll find this combination of glyphs, letters, and numbers that appears to read DE:10. Now, knowing Bungie's very clear affinity for biblical references in Halo, it's very fair to argue that this stands for Deuteronomy 10, which is the 10th passage in the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th book in the Old Testament. In this passage, Moses receives the 10 Commandments. He cuts out 2 tablets of stone, on which the Lord writes the 10 Commandments that Moses then puts in the Ark. The wooden Ark, not Noah's Ark. Even still though, for that passage to be the only logical thing that pops out of the glyphs is quite symbolic, don't you think? So the last thing that I want to talk about pertaining to this theory that at face value doesn't really make sense is its connection to the precursors. Obviously the precursors were a thing that 343 created and only existed in that era of Halo and onwards, and so that instantly invalidates this theory because obviously Bungie didn't make them. Except that's not the case at all, because in the very same game that these glyphs first appear, so too did the precursors. That's right, the precursors were first introduced in the Bestarian book that came with the heroic and legendary editions of Halo 3. But even with that aside, the Mantle was popping up in Halo as early as Halo 1, at least in symbol form, and so precursors or not, there was nothing stopping Justin Hayward from inscribing the Mantle into the Gilded Walls of Sandtrap in the form of glyphs all those years ago. So, has Halo's oldest mystery been solved? Well, I think it's quite subjective. Of course, the glyphs themselves are yet to be translated, and frankly, if the tech that was used to decipher the Zodiac Killer's cipher is struggling to decipher them, then I think it's going to be a long time before they ever get a proper translation. But honestly, I don't even think that really matters because of what you can infer based on the extenuating circumstances surrounding the glyphs' presences. I am truly adamant that these glyphs represent a eulogy. I mean, to me it makes so much sense. But to go one step further, perhaps they're a eulogy that's tied to the Mantle, or that involves the Mantle in some capacity. I mean, both mine and Red Nomster's theories aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, the more I think about it, they actually kind of complement each other quite well. But what do you think? Given that this is an ever-evolving mystery that likely won't be solved for decades, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments as to what the glyphs mean and what they also represent. And also, don't forget to check out Red Nomster as well. Like, seriously, his content, especially on these glyphs, is amazing. So, I hope you guys enjoyed yet another deep dive into one of Halo's many ancient secrets. This kind of content is honestly my favourite to make at the moment, so if you have any other topics in this kind of ballpark that you want me to cover, then make sure to leave them down below in the comments. And also, while you're down there, like and sub as well. I never asked for that, but I'm asking now, so if you want to, hit those buttons. So, with that said, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there as per usual, and thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.